They told me the church was a refuge for the broken, a sanctuary where the weak could kneel and be healed beneath the shadow of its towering spires. I believed them, or maybe I just wanted to believe, because when I first stepped beneath that vaulted ceiling, I was starving for something I could not name. The air was thick with incense, the kind that coats your lungs and makes you feel like you're breathing in ancient dust. The light was dim, fractured through stained glass that painted my skin with bleeding reds and bruised purples. A priest in robes of shadow approached, his face half hidden, his voice soft, promising me light, promising me safety, promising me that the sins gnawing at me would be burned away if I only obeyed. The way he said, "Obey," made my bones ache, as if the command had weight beyond words. I nodded, because what else could I do? That night they gave me a room deep in the underbelly of the cathedral, not in the guest halls, not in the places where pilgrims sleep, but somewhere beneath the stones. The walls were damp, sweating with black moisture, the air colder than the world above. I lay on the cot listening to something moving in the pipes, the groan of old wood, the scrape of nails against stone. I told myself it was rats. I told myself it was nothing. But when I closed my eyes, I felt breath on my neck, warm and wet, and I swore I heard a whisper pressed against my ear. A single word that froze me. Not in Latin, not in any prayer, but a word that felt older, sharper, hungrier. It repeated until I pressed my face into the thin pillow and prayed for silence. When morning came, the priest was waiting. He asked if I had dreamed. His smile widened when I lied and told him no. He placed a chalice in my hands, its silver tarnished, its rim darkened. He told me to drink, and though I could see nothing inside it, when I raised it to my lips, the liquid slid down my throat, thick and hot, tasting of rust. He said again the words, the same ones from the night before, that the church promised me light, that I was chosen, that soon I would see the radiance. But I swear in that moment, in the flicker of torchlight across his eyes, I saw not radiance, but something vast and black staring back, and I knew the sanctuary I had sought had already become a tomb. The next day was not like the first. The cathedral no longer seemed like a place of worship, but a labyrinth of stone and silence. The corridors stretched farther than I remembered, their arches leaning low as if pressing down. I walked them alone, or so I thought, yet the sound of footsteps always followed just beyond the echo of my own. The priests did not pray the way I had seen before. They did not sing hymns that lifted to the heavens. Instead, they murmured in voices that sank into the floor, syllables too jagged to be holy, words that felt like insects crawling across my skin. I stood at the edge of one gathering, hidden in shadow, and watched their bodies sway in rhythm, not upward toward heaven, but downward toward something beneath. Their hands clutched the air as if begging to be pulled lower. When one of them turned, his eyes caught mine, not with surprise but recognition, as though he had been waiting for me to witness. His lips curved into a smile too wide, too slow, and he gestured me forward. I stepped back, but the corridor behind me had closed somehow. The door I had come through was no longer there. Just smooth stone that pulsed faintly like the surface of skin. They gave me tasks, though never explained their meaning. I was told to polish chalices that bled when touched, to carry candles that burned cold instead of hot, to sweep altars where no dust settled. But instead of fine black powder that clung to my hands, when I tried to wash it away, it seeped deeper into the lines of my skin, until it looked as though veins of ash ran beneath my flesh. At night, the whispers grew louder. They no longer came only when I closed my eyes. They hissed from the corners, slithered from cracks in the stone. They called me by name, though I had never given it to anyone there. Their voices overlapped, hundreds of them, like a choir of the damned pressing against the walls. I stuffed cloth into my ears until blood dripped from them, but the sound sank straight into the marrow of my bones. And yet, each morning, the priest greeted me with warmth, as though none of it mattered. He placed his hand on my shoulder and told me I was being prepared, that all light requires a vessel, that I would carry their fire soon. His touch lingered, heavy and suffocating. and I realized in horror that the warmth in his palm was not human. It was feverish, like the heat of something burning alive but refusing to die. On the third night, the air in my chamber thickened until breathing felt like drowning. The single torch on the wall sputtered as if suffocated. Shadows lengthened and twisted in ways that no flame should cause. I pressed myself against the cot, gripping the thin blanket like a child, but the whispers no longer lingered at the edges. They crawled straight into the room, circling, weaving around me like serpents in the dark. One voice rose above the others, lower, slower, heavy with an authority that made the rest fall silent. It spoke not in words I knew, but in sounds that vibrated through my skull. My vision blurred, and my hands clawed at my temples. I stumbled to the basin of water and plunged my head inside, hoping to drown out the sound. But the water boiled around me, searing my skin. I yanked my head back and stared at the basin, the surface calm, unbroken, cold as stone. The next morning my reflection looked wrong. The basin's water showed a face that was mine, but its eyes were not. They were hollow pits filled with a red glow that pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat. I staggered back, knocking the basin to the ground. Yet when the water spilled, it pooled toward the door, not randomly, but with purpose, flowing in a perfect line as though guided. That was the day they led me deeper, down staircases coiled like entrails, through doorways too narrow for the human frame. Yet somehow I fit. The walls slick with that same black moisture I had seen before. They told me this was the undersanctum, a place never meant for pilgrims, only for the chosen. They pressed a rusted key into my palm and told me I must open the final door when the time came. The metal was warm, as though freshly forged in fire, and it bit into my skin like teeth. I wanted to scream, to flee, to claw my way back to daylight. But every path I had memorized was gone. The cathedral shifted with each step. Halls lengthened, doors vanished, windows bricked themselves shut. The sky had been cut away, leaving only stone above. That night, I dreamed of the final door, tall and iron-bound, its surface covered in carvings that moved when I looked too long, mouths opening and closing, eyes rolling beneath the metal. It called to me, pulling me forward. My body moved though my mind resisted. I woke on the floor of my chamber, clutching the key so tightly that blood streaked my palm. And the whispers were no longer whispers. They were laughter, echoing as though 1,000 throats pressed against the stone, mocking the idea that I had ever been free. Sleep abandoned me after that night. Whenever I closed my eyes, I saw the iron door, its carvings shifting like muscle under skin, its surface trembling as if something vast and hungry pressed from the other side. The key burned against my chest where I had tied it with cloth. It pulsed like a second heartbeat, faster, harder, urging me downward. The priests treated me differently now. They no longer spoke in riddles or cloaked commands. They watched me openly, their eyes wide and unblinking, as if waiting for me to break. At meals they placed their bowls before me, untouched, murmuring prayers that sank into my ears like oil. I tried to refuse, but their voices pressed down until my hands moved on their own, spooning the grey flesh into my mouth. Its taste sour and sweet like rotting fruit, the texture slick with veins that writhed as I chewed. When I retched, they smiled. When I gagged, they whispered. When I swallowed, they nodded as though something sacred had been accomplished. I began to lose time. I would stand in one corridor and then blink, only to find myself in another. I woke one evening to find black stains on my hands, the smell of iron heavy in the air, though no memory told me what I had done. In the chapel I saw candles arranged in a circle, their flames burning blue, and I knew somehow I had placed them there, though I never remembered carrying them. The key grew heavier, dragging me forward with each step. I could feel its weight pulling me down the staircases, guiding me closer to the undersanctum. Each time I passed that first threshold, I felt the stone groan, not from pressure or age, but from something alive deep within, shifting, breathing, waiting. That night, the laughter returned, louder, layered with screams that did not fade. I clamped my hands over my ears until my nails tore skin, yet still the sound remained. The torches flickered, and in the smoke I saw shapes bending, too tall, too thin. Their limbs jointed wrong, their heads bowed low as though mocking prayer. They shuffled closer, but when I blinked, the chamber was empty, and yet the smell of sulphur lingered, acrid and thick, as if hell itself had pressed its mouth against the stones and exhaled into my room. I curled against the cot, clutching the key until it cut deeper, until blood ran down my wrist, and I realized then, with a clarity more terrifying than any dream, that the church had not promised me light at all. It had promised me a door, and I was no longer certain that I had the strength not to open it. By the fifth night, the cathedral no longer felt like stone and mortar. It breathed. Every wall swelled and contracted like the ribs of some vast animal. The air thickened with each inhale, pulling me closer, then pressed me back with each exhale. My footsteps echoed not against stone but against something softer, something wet. And when I touched the wall in panic, my fingers came back streaked with a red sheen. The priests began to chant openly, their processions no longer cloaked in secrecy. They carried icons carved from bone, strung with hair that swayed though no wind stirred. Their chants did not rise in melody, but droned in a pitch that made my teeth rattle, each word settling deeper in my skull, until I could not tell if I thought them myself. I stumbled through the corridors with their voices stitched into my mind. One evening I caught my reflection again in the blackened glass of a chapel window. My face looked hollow, skin drawn tight, lips cracked and bleeding. But it was my eyes that froze me. They were not merely hollowed now. They were bruised with rings of shadow, as if I had not slept in years. And behind them something shifted, not me, but watching me, a shadow layered beneath my skin. When I tore myself away, I found the priest waiting in the corridor, his smile stretched too far, his teeth stained dark. He placed a finger to my lips, silencing the scream I hadn't realized was rising, and whispered that I had been heard, that the door was listening, that soon it would answer. I tried to refuse the key, to drop it into the font of holy water and flee. But the moment it left my fingers, my hand seized in agony, my nails split backward, blood pouring down my wrist. The key clattered against the stone, and yet still lay in my palm when I opened it, burning hotter, heavier. I knew then that it had never been given. It had chosen. That night as I lay on the cot, the whispers no longer came from cracks in the walls. They came from inside my chest. I could feel the vibrations along my ribs, each word a pulse, each syllable a contraction of my lungs. They asked me to let them out, begged me, promised me light brighter than the sun, if only I would release them. I curled on the floor, sobbing, pressing my hands to my chest as if I could cage them inside. But through the darkness, I felt something press back. Fingers, not mine, pressing from within, straining against the bone. And that was when I understood. The key was never meant to open the door in the stone. It was meant to open me. By the sixth day, I no longer knew whether it was daylight outside. The cathedral had closed in around me. The stained glass no longer glowed. The windows showed nothing but darkness, as if the sun itself had been banished. The priests said nothing of it. Their chants never ceased. They swayed in endless rhythm, their mouths foaming with syllables that stretched too long to belong to any tongue of man. I tried to confront one of them. I demanded to know what they had done to me, why the key seared my flesh, why the whispers would not stop. The priest's eyes softened, as though he pitied me. He reached out and touched my chest with 2 fingers, just over my heart, and whispered a prayer that sounded like grinding teeth. My body convulsed, and from my throat spilled a sound that was not mine. A guttural shriek that echoed down the stone corridors. When it ended, I collapsed, coughing blood that steamed against the floor. The priest smiled and said I was ready. After that, they did not feed me. They did not give me water. Yet I did not starve. I did not thirst. My body should have wasted away. But instead it grew heavy, weighted with something inside. The whispers grew clearer now, no longer fragments but sentences. They told me I was chosen, that the church had promised light, but that light burned through flesh, and someone must carry it. Someone must bear the vessel so that the pit could open. When I touched my skin, I felt movement beneath it. Not the twitch of muscle, not the shift of vein, but something writhing, something coiled and waiting. I clawed at my own arms until ribbons of blood dripped. But each time the wounds closed too quickly, knitting shut, as if the thing inside me refused to let its shell break. One night, I woke to find symbols carved into the walls of my chamber. Spirals, eyes, mouths yawning wide. I swore I had not carved them, yet the blood that painted them was fresh and still warm on my hands. The torches flickered, and in the shifting light the mouths opened wider. The eyes blinked, the spirals spun, and the chamber tilted, pulling me toward the stone, as if gravity itself bent to their shapes. I pressed myself against the cot, clutching the key against my chest, whispering prayers I had long forgotten, and for a moment the whispers hushed. But then they laughed, a deep, layered laugh that rolled through me until my bones rattled, and in that laugh came a truth I could not bear. The church had not promised me salvation. It had promised me transformation, and I was already becoming something I did not recognize, something that did not belong to the world above. By the seventh night I could no longer stay in my chamber. The walls pressed closer with every breath, the whispers rising until they drowned out thought. The key throbbed like a wound, tugging me down the staircases toward the under sanctum. I resisted, clawing at the stones to hold myself back. But the cathedral shifted beneath me, the floors tilting, doors slamming open, hallways narrowing until the only path that remained was down. The priests were waiting at the foot of the final stair, their robes drenched in something darker than ink, their mouths moving in perfect unison, not chanting now, but moaning, their voices stretched into a single low vibration that rattled the marrow in my bones. They parted as I approached, not guiding me, but herding me. Their eyes gleamed with wet hunger, their smiles carved too deep into their faces. The air grew hotter the deeper I went. Sulphur stung my throat, and every surface glowed faintly, as though embers were buried beneath the stone. The key seared against my chest, smoke rising from where it burned into my skin. I tried to tear it free, but my fingers blistered the moment they touched it. I stumbled forward, tears streaming, choking on the stench of rot and ash. At the heart of the under sanctum, the iron door waited, taller than any cathedral spire, its surface alive with carvings that writhed, mouths opening and closing in silence, eyes rolling, spirals spinning endlessly. The air pulsed with each movement, drawing me forward. My knees buckled as though gravity bent toward it. I dropped to the ground, dragging myself across the stone, the key glowing so bright it illuminated the chamber in red. The priests encircled me, their voices rising, their bodies convulsing in jerks and spasms, bones cracking beneath their skin, their robes splitting as their flesh shifted, spines twisting into unnatural arches, their faces elongating, teeth breaking through their lips. They were no longer men of God, but attendants of something else, guardians of the pit. The door trembled, dust falling from the ceiling, the ground splitting in hairline fractures, heat pouring through. The whispers no longer confined, now a roar. Thousands of voices screaming to be let through, screaming my name, demanding release. I clawed at the floor, begging, pleading. But my body moved without me, rising to my feet, the key lifting from my chest as though my blood had already paid the price. And the last thought that pierced through the madness was the promise they had made, the one that had brought me here, that the church had promised me holy light. But I understood now that light was fire, and the pit was waiting to feast. When I reached the door, my body betrayed me. The key tore itself from my grasp and hovered before the iron, spinning slowly as though savoring the moment. Each turn flared brighter until its glow seared the carvings into the backs of my eyes. I tried to close them, but the light burned through my lids, painting every vein red. The priests fell to their knees, their bodies still convulsing, jaws unhinging until their screams became nothing but wet gurgles. One by one their chests split open as if invisible claws had raked from the inside out. Smoke poured from their wounds, forming into shapes that clawed at the door, pressing against the surface like shadows starving for release. The smell of blood and sulphur mingled until my throat blistered. The key plunged into the lock, and the carvings writhed faster, mouths stretching wide in silent hunger, eyes rolling wildly, spirals churning as if to drag me into their pull. The metal shrieked as the door began to open, inch by inch, light pouring through. Not golden light, not heavenly light, but light that burned black. Shadows so intense they had weight, pressing me back though I had nowhere to flee. From the crack in the door came sound, not the whispers I had endured, not the laughter, but screams, endless, layered, rising from a depth so vast it swallowed thought. Every voice clawed into me, begging for release, warning me, damning me. I pressed my hands over my ears, blood spilling between my fingers. But the sound only grew, echoing in my skull until my vision shook. The ground split wider, rivers of molten stone tearing through the chamber, heat blistering my skin. The priests collapsed, their bodies twitching as if strings had been cut, their empty husks smoking. Yet their mouths still moved, still forming prayers though no breath remained. I stumbled forward, trying to stop the key, trying to wrench it from the lock. But the moment my hand touched it, the carvings surged outward, pressing against my flesh, mouths biting into my arms, eyes staring into me, spirals pulling me closer. I screamed, but no sound came, only a hiss. The door widened another inch, and through the crack I saw movement. Something vast, something shifting, wings without feathers, limbs that bent in too many places, eyes blinking in every direction. The air quaked under its weight. And I realized then the pit was not empty. It was not waiting. It had always been full. And now it was awake. The crack widened until it was no longer a sliver, but a wound, spilling its black light into the under-sanctum. The air turned liquid, every breath scalding, every heartbeat hammering like a drum against bone. I staggered backward, but the pull grew stronger, the gravity of that pit dragging me forward as if my body was already claimed. Inside, shapes pressed against the threshold, not fully seen but hinted, fragments of limbs too vast to belong to any creature of earth. Eyes spiraled upon eyes, opening and closing like breathing wounds. Voices thundered, not in words, but in hunger. A chorus of starvation echoing through the chamber. They screamed for flesh, for vessels, for release. The priests, broken husks though they were, lifted their heads, their mouths unhinged wider than bone should allow. Black smoke gushed from them, streams of ash and fire weaving together into hands that reached toward me, skeletal, clawed, clutching at my chest. They whispered one final phrase, their voices layered in perfect unity. You are the feast. You are the flame. The key pulsed harder, embedding itself deeper into the iron door. The lock screeched as though the world itself resisted, stone raining from the ceiling, the entire cathedral groaning under the weight of what clawed from beneath. I dropped to my knees, my skin splitting along my arms, seams of fire glowing through the cracks, as if my body was beginning to burn from the inside out. I begged for mercy, but no answer came, only laughter, deep and rolling. The same laughter that had haunted my chamber, now amplified 1,000-fold. The chamber swam in shadow and heat, my vision warped, and when I looked at my hands, they were no longer mine. They were blackened, stretched, claws instead of fingers, trembling with hunger, not my own. Through the widening gap, I glimpsed teeth, endless rows, layered like stalactites, gnashing, clattering, grinding against each other in desperation. I felt them gnaw inside my skull, gnawing at thought, gnawing at memory, stripping me down to nothing but instinct. The door shuddered one last time, metal screaming, the carvings bursting into flame, and the truth struck me like a blade. The church had never tried to contain the pit. The church was its mouth, the cathedral its mask, every prayer, every hymn, every promise of light, nothing but a lure to feed it, and now it had me. The moment the door split wide enough to gape, the air was ripped from my lungs, dragged into the chasm like the cathedral itself was inhaling. The priests' bodies were torn apart in silence, their flesh unraveling into black threads that coiled into the pit, their bones clattering across the stone before melting into ash. I tried to crawl away, but the floor pulsed beneath me, slick with heat and blood, pushing me forward as though I was nothing but another offering. The light, or what passed for it, spilled into me, searing my skin, peeling it away in strips, yet no wound bled. Instead, fire ran through my veins, licking up my arms, coiling around my throat, my mouth opened to scream, but only smoke poured out, thick, choking, alive. The whispers were no longer outside. They were inside. Every voice screaming through my blood, clawing at my heart, my marrow, my brain. I staggered upright, though I did not will it. My limbs moved like a marionette pulled by unseen strings. My chest split open along the seams that had burned for days, ribs bending outward, fingers pressing from within, slick and clawed. They gripped the edges of my bone cage and pulled, something pushing, forcing itself through, my body bending, cracking, surrendering. The door flung open wider, and from it poured a gale of heat so fierce the chamber walls melted, stone dripping like wax. The carvings writhed in agony, their mouths shrieking though no sound carried, eyes bursting, spirals spinning into smoke. And from the threshold emerged a shadow that towered, wings tearing the air into ribbons, limbs folding and unfolding in impossible symmetry, every inch of it a contradiction of form and hunger. It bent low, lowering its countless eyes to me. And in that moment I knew the truth. This was no arrival, no breach. It had always been here, waiting beneath, gnawing against the cage of the church, and all they had done was feed it enough to stir. The voices inside me rose as one, screaming not in fear but in triumph. My body broke fully then, the shell splitting, light flooding out, black fire casting against the chamber, and from my throat came a sound that was not mine, a roar that joined the pit, shaking the cathedral above, cracking its spires, toppling its bells. I understood, with terror sharp enough to gut me, that I was no longer a pilgrim, no longer a man, no longer anything but a vessel stretched thin around a hunger vast enough to swallow worlds, and the feast had only just begun. The moment the roar shattered me, the chamber itself began to collapse, not from stone giving way, but from reality tearing at its edges. Walls flickered like flame, arches stretched higher than sight, then shrank into suffocating corridors. Stairways bent in on themselves until they spiraled into black mouths that opened and closed like throats. And all the while the thing towering from the doorway grew, its form unraveling into coils of shadow, each one wrapping the pillars and snapping them like twigs. The priests who remained, crawling and broken, tried to chant, words scraping from their ruined throats, but their prayers came out backwards, syllables devoured before they even formed, and their bodies liquefied where they knelt, skin bubbling into rivers that slithered toward the pit as if the blood itself knew where to go. I watched, helpless and bound in fire, as their faces stretched in the streams, still mouthing silent prayers, even as they sank. The ground beneath me buckled, stone cracking open into black rivers, and through those fractures I saw not soil, not earth, but a depthless sea of eyes, some wide with hunger, others shut as if sleeping, all blinking in a rhythm that matched my own pulse. They stared up at me, not with hatred, not even with worship, but with expectation. Like a master watching his hound take its first command, the black cathedral groaned above us, its spires lurching sideways, bells snapping loose and plummeting into the void, each one striking the walls and sounding not like metal, but like screams stretched into eternity. And with each crash, I felt the sound rattle through my ribs, shaking loose what little of me remained. The creature, the hunger, the shadow, the thing I now carried, did not step fully into this world. It leaned only part way, a sliver of itself pressing through, because even the cathedral, built on centuries of sacrifices and secrets, could not hold its full shape. Instead, its gaze poured into me, a heat that carved new flesh where mine had been stripped, black armor of bone knitting across my chest, veins glowing like molten iron across my arms. My voice returned, but it was not my own. I whispered a single phrase, though I had not thought it, though I had not chosen it. My tongue split, teeth tearing through the words like blades. The gate is not opened, the gate is inside. And as I spoke, the cathedral shook so violently that every stone saint lining its walls split down the middle, their faces peeling into snarls of agony, wings snapping, halos crumbling, as though heaven itself recoiled from what now breathed inside me. The words I had spoken lingered in the air, vibrating through the black cathedral like a pulse of venom. The fire that held me no longer burned. It fused, searing itself into my marrow, until I could not tell where flesh ended and flame began. The chains binding me cracked like brittle bones and fell away, not because they were broken, but because they were no longer needed. For I was not prisoner anymore. I was vessel. The hunger that had loomed behind me now throbbed within me, moving through my veins with each heartbeat, twisting them into cords of black fire. I felt my ribs split open like shutters, and something beneath them pressed against my skin. Not lungs, not heart, but a furnace, molten and alive, its rhythm syncing with the endless roar still echoing in the void. The priests who had not yet melted clawed themselves along the floor, faces shredded from trying to scream. Some reached for me, not in plea, but in recognition, their eyes wide with worship and terror. They mouthed words that no longer had meaning, calling me not man, not brother, but blade. Their devotion corroded by fear, their prayers bleeding into madness as they bowed their foreheads to the black rivers and let themselves be carried away. The cathedral's great crucifix, looming above the altar, twisted in its place. The figure nailed upon it bent backwards, arms tearing from their sockets as the wood splintered. The face of the effigy peeled open to reveal not holiness, but hollow. A void lined with teeth, gnashing in approval as the structure itself bent toward me, its pillars bowing like trees in a storm. I tried to close my eyes, but I no longer had lids. The furnace inside me would not allow blindness. It forced me to see everything, every shadow trembling, every wall breathing, every soul reduced to ash in the firelight, and within that sight came understanding. This was no accident, no chaos. The branding had not cursed me. It had sculpted me, stripped me down until there was nothing left but edge. My hands, now clawed with bone sharpened into obsidian points, clutched at the air, and I felt it bend, folding like cloth between my fingers. I pulled, and the sound that came forth was not wind, not earth, but screams, the cries of all who had been given to this place, their voices bound to my will, their pain drawn into my strike. The hunger whispered through me, though I could not tell if it was inside my skull or if my skull was inside of it. It told me that I was forged, not born, that the holy sword they had given me before was only prelude, a mockery of the true blade, because the true weapon was not steel at all. It was flesh made eternal through ruin. And when I stood, the cathedral knelt, walls collapsing into bowing arches, gargoyles shattering into dust as though saluting their new master. The pit at the center flared open, and the river of blood below rose to greet me, not as flood but as crown, weaving around my skull like serpents, dripping into my eyes, sealing them not shut but wide, so I would never look away again. I realized then with a horror that thrilled me. My body was no longer mine, my name no longer mine. I was no longer a man branded by priests. I was the brand itself, walking, burning, unquenchable. The stairwell ended in a cavern that felt older than the earth itself, its walls slick with a black moisture that pulsed as though alive. the air so heavy with heat and the reek of sulphur that I could barely force breath into my lungs. Above me the last scraps of candlelight retreated, swallowed by a ceiling that groaned with the sound of distant movement, like something vast shifting in its sleep. I had entered the cathedral's heart, and it was not stone and mortar. It was a wound torn open into something that should never have touched our world. The priests guided me forward without words, their faces empty as masks carved from ash, each of them carrying iron lamps that burned not with flame, but with a green light, cold yet searing to the eyes. And as we moved deeper, I saw the carvings etched into the walls, glyphs that resembled human bones bent into impossible shapes, symbols that seemed to bleed as I stared at them, dripping down the stone only to be swallowed by the floor. At the center of the chamber, a pit gaped wide, not dug but formed as though the ground itself had collapsed under some monstrous weight, and from within it came the sound of chewing, slow and wet, punctuated by the crack of splitting marrow. I staggered forward despite myself, and as I looked over the edge I saw not bodies, but fragments of them, faces stripped of skin, torsos gnawed to cages of ribs, all shifting as if dragged by unseen jaws deeper into the abyss. The priests stood in a circle around me, chanting in a rhythm that made my bones tremble, and the green light of their lamps began to bleed into the pit, illuminating what crouched at its edge. A shape that was not a man, not an animal, but a fusion of both, bent backward with limbs too long and a mouth that opened wider than its skull should allow, rows upon rows of teeth grinding as it lifted something squirming toward its maw. And in the flicker of that sick light I understood the pit was not a prison for demons. It was a table, and I was being led to sit upon it. The priests moved as one, the sound of their chanting thickening until it felt like cords tightening around my throat. I tried to turn, to escape the pit's rim, but the floor beneath my boots shifted like damp flesh, holding me in place as if the cathedral itself had grown hands. Cold iron brushed my wrists before I could cry out, the first shackle snapping shut with a finality that rang through the chamber. Like a judge's gavel, I thrashed. But another pair of hands seized me, pale and too strong, their fingers knotting into my flesh as though bone and tendon were being rewritten to obey their grip. The second cuff locked around my other arm, followed by the harsh weight of chains dragging down from the ceiling, thick links black with corrosion, each one etched with the same bleeding glyphs I had seen carved into the walls, symbols that glowed faintly as though feeding on my heartbeat. The priests never spoke to me, never explained. They simply watched as the chains tightened, drawing my arms out wide until my chest was exposed to the cavern's heat. Sweat poured down my skin only to be swallowed by the iron, hissing as though the chains themselves drank it. I felt them pulse against my flesh, sinking to the rhythm of the chants, until it seemed my own veins beat in time with theirs. I screamed, a raw sound that echoed back, twisted, warped, as if the cathedral mocked me by repeating my terror in 100 alien voices. Above the pit, the green light grew stronger, flaring as the creature stirred, its long limbs uncoiling, its mouth widening into a grin too vast to belong to anything born of nature. The priests did not look at it. They looked only at me, their mouths moving faster now, the chant becoming something like laughter pressed through broken teeth. The chains jerked, pulling me forward until my toes hung just above the pit's edge, the abyss below opening like a second mouth hungry for what little defiance I had left. And in that moment I understood the truth they had hidden. I was not being offered as a simple sacrifice. I was being remade, torn from the world of men and bound to feed whatever horror crouched in the dark. A ritual not of death, but of transformation. The chains dragged me closer, each clinking link echoing like a funeral bell. My chest arched against the pull until my ribs strained. The green glow surged from the pit and bathed the cavern in a sickly radiance. Every surface, every stone, every rotting tapestry of bone now seemed alive, pulsing in rhythm with the chant. I tried to shout words, to curse them, to beg, but no sound left my throat. Something unseen clamped down on my voice. The priests had encircled me fully now, their hooded forms swaying in unison. arms raised, palms carved with identical glyphs, blood dripping down in perfect lines that did not fall randomly, but instead hovered mid-air, forming strands of crimson script that wound themselves around me like a cocoon. My body trembled under their weight, the blood burning like acid yet binding like rope. And then it began, the tearing, not of skin but of self, as if invisible hands had reached inside my chest and started pulling out the pieces that made me human. Fragments of memory. My mother's face, her childhood laughter, the warmth of sunlight on my skin, each ripped away and devoured by the bloodletters as though I were being hollowed. I tried to cling to them, but the chains pulsed again, sending another surge through me that left me weaker, emptier. The creature below moved with a sound like stone grinding against stone, its grin widening until its jaw stretched into impossible lengths. I saw in its eyes the reflection of what they were shaping me into, not a victim, but a vessel, a body stripped of its past and rewritten with its hunger. And as I looked into that pit, I knew the priests did not serve this monster. They were building it, piece by piece, and I was to be the next cornerstone in its design. One priest finally stepped forward, his hood slipping just enough for me to glimpse his face, pale and stretched too thin, his mouth sewn at the E. Deeges with black cord to keep his smile permanent. His eyes wept. Not tears, but dark fluid that steamed as it touched the stone. He lifted a blade curved like a crescent moon and pressed it against my chest. Not cutting yet, only resting there, letting me feel the chill of steel and the certainty of what was about to come. The chanting grew so loud the walls shook, and then the blade pressed deeper, kissing skin, promising the final severing of who I was before the pit consumed me entirely.